Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on how to quickly generate AI-driven content effortlessly with precision, control, and scalability. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. First, the webinar is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be sent out after the event. All attendees are in mute mode and will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have questions, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A button on your screen. We'll try to answer the questions as they are submitted. If there are questions that we are not able to get to, we will answer those via email after the webinar. I'd like to introduce our two presenters. First, Keith Parent, CEO and co-founder of Court Square Group, and Brian Reynolds, CEO of Doxonomy.
Thank you, Roy.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Keith Parent. I am the CEO of Court Square Group. We are a managed service firm. We manage infrastructure for life science companies, and we have what's called ARC. It's an audit-ready compliant cloud environment. In our environment, we host a number of different applications all the way from preclinical through manufacturing. And our goal is to give our life science clients the peace of mind to know that when they put an application within our audit-ready compliant cloud, that it will be secure and safe and all the things that you would need from a regulatory compliant perspective. And many of the clients that we have will integrate multiple applications together. That led us to actually creating a tool called RegDocs 365, which is a content repository that I'll talk about in a few minutes, but I want to let Brian have a chance to introduce himself, and then we can talk about how we got together. Brian.
Yeah, Keith, great, thanks. Yeah, my name's Brian Reynolds, and I'm the CEO of the Doxonomy platform, software application, and Keith and I have known each other for quite some time, several years now, and we've have a very tight integration with the RegDocs 365 platform, and so we're very excited to talk to you today around what we're doing with generative AI and what we're doing with going from zero to first draft, and creating new content with the content that we crawl, understand in the regulated environment. So looking forward to talking about that.
Great. So let me pick it up from here. I want to just talk a little bit about how I met Brian and why the integration of Doxonomy with the RegDocs tool was important to me. We had a client, as I mentioned, we have an audit-ready compliant cloud. We host a content repository. We host multiple content repositories. We've hosted things like Documentum, NextDoc, Puma, all the ones that you would think about over time. We've been in business for 30 years, so we understand the life science world. And what we found is that we were hosting lots of clinical content and regulatory content with many of the different applications that we're hosting and managing. I had a customer, a large concern working with a Japanese company that basically wanted to be able to search across multiple languages, particularly Japanese and English text within documents. That put me on the search for finding some tools that could actually do both. And that brought me to Brian's booth at an RSIDM show where we looked at what was going on. And he said, oh, yeah, we can do that. So we wanted to be able to search for those documents. What we found out was that the tool that Brian had brought to the table could easily be integrated into my RegDocs environment. It could host and manage multiple repositories, or could tie into multiple repositories that we were managing. And at the same time, the feature functionality that I got out of using the tool actually really enhanced what we were able to bring to the market for our client base. And today we're going to show you a little bit about that, particularly in one particular avenue where we're able to pull data out of other documents and be able to pull them together and then put them into other documents. So I think for other systems. And I think that's a really important point to make as we go through and look at this. But in this case, we wanted to be able to look at full text searching. We want to search on metadata. We want to do keyword searching, all the normal things that standard RegDocs can do. That was great, but it didn't solve our problem. What happened is by adding in Doxonomy, we now have an advanced search functionality that allows us to do multi-language searching. We can do similarity searching across documents, across multiple repositories, or libraries if we have multiple libraries within our RegDocs platform. And we also have some capabilities of using AI-based search capabilities to do metadata tagging and a whole bunch of other things that we've since talked about and incorporated into our tools, particularly things like intelligent archiving, which we've done another webinar on. And we're going to continue to push the envelope on different things that we're working on. Brian will go into a little bit about doing some generative AI, which is actually creating documents within the system. So I think that having content is one thing, but having the ability to use that content and kind of drive that content forward and use it is really important. Most people, when they're looking at content or looking at AI systems, they're used to using ChatGPT and some of these other things, but there's still a lot of hype out there about AI, and I'm a firm believer in looking at point solutions that actually incorporate the tools that we bring to bear on the solutions that we can bring to our clients. And I think that Brian and Doxonomy have worked really well with my team, or our team at Court Square and at RegDocs, to basically come up with some of those tools, whether it's auto classification of documents, identifying how to create other documents out of content within documents. There's a lot of different areas that we can look at and use as we go forward. With that being the case, that's kind of the background of how we got together and what is really important to us with our client base. I'm going to let Brian pick it up from here, talk a little bit about some of the background on the tool itself, and then we'll get into some demos and show you a little bit about how we do what we do. Brian, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, absolutely, Keith. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of come at this with a couple of quick slides, and then yeah, like Keith said, let's get into the actual into the pudding, right? Into the application and take a look at what we're able to do so you can get a sense of what that is. As we go forward here, let me change slides. I think it's important first to kind of understand sort of what this engine is all about, right? And as Keith was just saying, it's really important. So you'll see RegDocs 365 right there, which is one of the repositories that we're integrated directly into, running inside of as part of the platform, which is incredibly powerful. But we can, as Keith said also, we can connect to multiple different repositories. So there really isn't a limit to the systems that we can connect to. And the beauty around this is when we talk about connecting to different repositories, we're not talking about actually migrating data or moving data into our system. We're talking about leaving those systems in place, identifying the content that's in those systems and indexing the intelligence out of that content into our system and leaving a pointer back to the source. Now, why is that important? Well, you have business processes that are built around these various different tools. You have regulated environments, you have validation that's been performed. There's a lot of reasons why you don't just move data around inside of the life sciences environment. But it's important to be able to bring all those together into one place in order to truly draw what we would call knowledge or intelligence out of that data and use it to drive processes forward. And this is really a segue into to the intelligence engine itself, right? It's important to sort of understand that in today's day and age, as Keith was saying, with ChatGPT and the onset of LLMs and all these options, everybody is in a buzz around all the hype associated with these different tools. And while they're incredibly powerful and they do all kinds of amazing things, and will be here for a long time and will morph obviously into more advanced things as we go forward, there is the aspect of how do I use this inside the business? How do I use this in a controlled manner that where I can get precision? I can't have an LLM hallucinating and writing stuff that I don't know about, right? Or it doesn't make sense, right? How do I control it? And then how do I do that with scale, right? How can I do that when I have to generate thousands of these records at a time and so forth? And how can I use them to streamline it? And so I think that's where connecting to your repositories, understanding the intelligence that's there, bringing it in, and then ultimately pushing that through the intelligence engine. So what is
Brian,
that?
before you
Sure.
hop onto the intelligence engine,
Yeah.
let me just kind of bring up a couple of points that people may not think about. But a lot of times we're going to be brought in to look at one area. And in this case, we have a TMF and we have a EDM reference model. We have an LS Basic that has all these the functionality of all the different departments. One of the things that we think about is if we can do auto classification of a TMF from clinical data that's coming in from different clinical sites, all of a sudden somebody talks about, hey, you know what? I've got these CMC documents. Is there a way that I can go through these documents and do this. Well, you may have all that CMC data in a totally different system.
Hmm.
Having the ability to use the pre-built crawlers that Doxonomy brings to bear gives us the ability to hook into that. So now instead of me having to try to integrate an application into that, I can point my crawlers at it and be able to get access to that data. The nice part about that is we can actually do a seamless interface in with another application without really having to know that application or understand what we need to do that. A lot of times our customers are using things like Box or Dropbox because it's easy, or they're working with a partner that may have already set something up there and they're sharing data there. Well, that's a great way for us to be able to hook into that and be able to do that. So when we talk about migration activities or moving data around or doing all that stuff, there's lots of ways to skin a cat. And I think this is a great way to use this tool. You bring it in for one thing, but then you can use it for others. So, Brian, I'll let you get back to that intelligence engine, but I just want to make sure that everybody understood that you may bring something like this in for one area, but when you start to think about how it can be used for that area, and then you start to extrapolate that over other areas or other processes that you have within your organization, all of a sudden it opens up a wide world to different things you can potentially do.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and so as the data does come in, and like you just said, as we connect to those different repositories, those clinical repositories and so forth, and we crawl that data and that intelligence comes in, well, what is in fact that intelligence engine? What are we talking about when it comes to that? And what we're really talking about when it comes to an intelligence engine is just that. It's a natural language engine, right? It's a system that has been trained and taught to interpret and understand content much like a human being would, right? It reads it really kind of like a human being would, obviously slightly different. It doesn't have eyes, but it has a different way of looking at that data in a mathematical sense, but it reads it and converts it and does various different things. So within our intelligence engine, there's a lot of power behind it. So as content flows in, again, from those various different repositories, it goes through this natural language process, right? We break everything down to textual based format and use that text to analyze and do things. We have vision capabilities so we can identify whether something is a video or an image and be able to extract that and then make predictions on what's in there and tell a story about, say, a picture. And then use that as part of the index, as part of the intelligence around the entire application. We have a classification engine that will help you sort things. And we'll see this in the demo. We'll go into this and look at it. But to where we can sort whether this document's a prescribing information guide, or is this a SMPC, or is this a clinical study report? And then, of course, based on those decisions, we can run very specific pipelines to extract insight, metadata, if you will, out of the content. Like if you were a human reading it with the document and the highlighter, you're highlighting what's important in that document. We can do that automatically with the machine. And we could deal, as Keith said, what one of the original reasons why he was looking at Doxonomy was we could deal with language, right? So we can process over 104 different languages. So depending on what the content is coming in, it might be in Japanese. That's okay. We can still process it through the same pipeline and make it available for people in any language. It could be English, it could be in Spanish, it could be in German, even though the original source content was Japanese per se. And then we take it to sort of that next level, right? We begin to build what we call a similarity engine around it. We build this data structure so that we can interpret and understand it. And that's really important because with the onset of the LLMs, which are wonderful and powerful and can do amazing things, if you just use them on the fly, you might get back things that look really correct, but aren't anywhere near correct, right? Lots of mistakes. I can't tell you how many calls that I've been on in the last year where we're going through these conversations with customers. We're saying, well, we tried to use this, but it created, noise. The only way that these things work is when you can, at a scalable way and a controllable way, is when you can use that information that exists in your existing environment, process it, and then have it help drive the answers that you want to come out of that generation side. And we'll see again examples of how we do that with the tool.
Brian, you mentioned a couple things that I want to kind of tick off on so that people can see where we're coming from and why this is so important in the life science world. A couple things you mentioned were the fact that you could pull in data and use different classification schemes. Well, one of some of those things like IDMP or TMF or EDM, all the different reference models that many industry partners are working on to kind of pull things together, those are perfectly set up for us to be able to take non-structured data out of different documents and be able to put it into a structure. There
Yes.
is so much non-structured data out there. You were quoting to me earlier, was it 80% of all the data out there is non-structured data, correct?
Yeah, it's unstructured, 80%. Yeah.
And the other thing that we talk about, and one of the reasons why it's such a natural way to work with Court Square and with taxonomy is the concept that we have an audit-ready compliant cloud. So we were just on a call a couple days ago, Brian and I, talking with a customer who was saying how she's so worried about her CMO putting stuff out onto the web because he's putting protocol stuff out there for Chat GPT. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you just shared data that you don't want to be sharing with
Right.
other people. This is the whole point of our industry. We need to look at how do we take and control the kind of what you're doing with here in the environment. And I think there's lots of ways that we can do that, particularly when we're dealing with, the routines and the application that Doxonomy has put together, and then the audit readiness of what we can bring together from a hosting perspective. So I think with that, I think that's a great segue into the actual applications that can be developed using these tools.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, in fact, I think the best way to get into it is just to start to visually see what the power is behind it and what we can do. So with that, let me go ahead and switch us over to this screen right here. We'll start out right here. You see that okay, Keith?
I can see it fine.
Awesome. All right, so within the platform, right, and we're seeing it from a raw sense right here. So we're just going to kind of go through it and take a look at some of the basics. We're going to focus on a different aspect of the application, but it's best to start out from the basis. Now, the beauty around the application is that there's an incredible, immense amount of power behind the application that does all kinds of very wonderful things to simplify and ease the life of the everyday user. But it also, when you go in to use it, that complexity has been kind of whisked away, right? We've tried to make it simple, as easy as using Google is sort of the mantra that we use internally. It's like we want to make this very easy to use. Of course, you can delve in and get deeper, and it gets more and more powerful depending on what you need. But you can start out just from a Google-like interface, like we're looking here to look at content. But if you think about that slide, a couple slides back with all the connectors, with all the different systems and they're flowing in, you're now looking at an interface where everything has been crawled or continues to be crawled and exists in here. And what does that look like? And for today's demo, we're going to kind of focus around some labeling kind of documents. But again, understand it could be any kind of content that we're crawling because we support many different classes out of the box. The application ships with a pre-built life sciences package that has a lot of pre-built connectors, pre-built classes already pre-trained and preloaded. So you can, in essence, turn this on and get started and be almost 80% of the way there. And that sort of unique 20% that exists in your company is what we would help you configure and tweak. And of course, we're there for you to help you. You can do as much of this as you want on your own, or you can leverage our teams to help you. I mean, we're very flexible in how all that works. But let's look at a document. In this case, we're going to click on My Files here, and we're going to bring up a list of documents that exist in the system. And in particular, we're going to focus in on this one, Xaralto SMPC. All right, so what we have here is a document that's come in. It was picked up through a connector and it was processed. If we were to click on the view, we could have a link back to the original PDF file. In this case, it was a PDF that came into the system and was processed. And what we'll see here is we'll see it within this context of our viewer, right? So it's a textual-based viewer. Now, what's important is the intelligence behind this without any user input, without a user having to enter metadata per se. We were able to extract a lot of information about this document. So let's look at, there's your traditional file data. This is your, create date, modified date, stuff that would be on any file that you would see in the file system. There's provided metadata. So if this were coming, say, out of Viva or Documentum or SharePoint, that meta information that was entered, that would be collected and picked up as well. But what's more important here around the intelligence is the stuff that wasn't. So you'll see here we have like active substances and ATC codes and things like that. This is content that this is meta information, if you will, that existed within the document that was extracted by the AI. So for example, if I open up and say, okay, well, show me, the active substance. Well, I can see for this particular product, it was rivaroxaban, right? Was the active substance. I could see, okay, well, what was the ATC code? I can jump down to that and we'll see we discovered the ATC code is this number here, and that's meta information that's now available. But we also parse content at a very detailed level, and Keith was talking about this. We can transform what was an unstructured PDF, as we just looked at, into something that is super structured. We understand these documents at the section level, at the word level, at the phrase level. So let's look at, for example, in the sections, we can identify, here are all the sections that were discovered, in this document. And you can see they're all highlighted and tagged, which means we understand where they are and we understand what goes behind those. We might have more depth in how we want to analyze the therapeutic indication section versus the section on posology and method of administration. So, and that's important for when we go to generating new content, which we're going to look at in just a second. If we jump back and take a look at the back end real quick, just not going too deep into this, but we'll see here that within classifications, we have a lot of classes that are predefined within the platform. So we have 1571s and 1572s and, approval letters and so forth. And we can have a lot of these. And with, like I said before, with the life science package that's built into the platform, a lot of this is pre-trained and preloaded and available for you at the time that you consume the application, enough to get you what we feel is like 80% of the way there. And then we would tweak the 20% that isn't. And that number varies, of course.
Brian, one of
Sure.
the things that I wanted to bring up a little bit as you're bringing up the screen and talking about this is, even within a life science company, everybody is siloed into different areas, whether you're CMC people or you're regulatory or you're clinical, and everybody has their own language or their own way of looking at certain data. I didn't even realize this until we were doing a project, and all of a sudden somebody said, well, we can read through these documents, but we're going to have a different take on these documents apart from what the CMC guys would, or apart from what the regulatory people would. When you start to see that, having these pre-built ways of looking at life science documents actually helps you as an organization have a great starting point looking at the different things. I happen to know what a 1572 document is, but would somebody, a chemist know that? Probably not. What would they be? How would they be? How would you go about doing it? You may look at what an approval letter looks like. Those are areas that I think coming in with the life science focus already get you so far to that first draft. And I think those are the things where we talk about this as, hey, how do I get a jump on these things? One of the things you mentioned to me, Brian, at one point was there's so much money spent in the drug development life cycle prior to doing that first NDA or that IND, that how can we cut down on some of that? You've actually given these people a way to start doing that. And I think that's important to note.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's just like that. And it's real easy to add new ones, right? So that 20% we talk about, right? If you need to add new classes, it doesn't require a data science degree to use this application. You literally go in and, you would go in and say, hey, I want to add a new one. You give it a name and a description. You choose a master class that you want to go for. So like life science document, create the classification. And then once you've created that classification in here, you can go back in, for example, here and just say, okay, I'm going to upload my samples. So you collect a series of samples of agency correspondence. We don't have any in there right now. So, and then you would select those, load them. When it's fully uploaded, this will become enabled. You hit train, and in 15, 20 minutes or so, or however, it doesn't take too long, it'll train an entirely new model. And again, that's all it takes That's all you need to know. You don't
Well,
need
and
to know about
I
the
think that's really
intricacies.
important, Brian, because I think a lot of people are saying, "Oh my God, how am I going to be able to learn how to use this system?" Where the reality is, your data is how you use the system. You
Correct.
already have within your own repositories, your different systems, you could have quality data, you could have
Correct.
agency correspondence data, you could have all sorts of different data from a regulatory or a clinical perspective that you can train on, and that's with your own data.
Right.
Doxonomy has already given you a starting point, but it's your own data that you're going to actually train based on the way you put your documents together. And I think that's a really important point to make.
That's exactly right. And in fact, you and I have talked a lot with customers, you know, and what they and the approach that they've taken with our direction, of course, was look, you know, you put the system in place, take the out of the box package, of course, crawl the environment, you know, first and get that initial crawl. We're not going to find everything. And, you know, you know, nobody would expect that to happen, you know, day one, right? But once the data is in the system, now you can use the system to start to identify what it didn't find and then very quickly make those quick tweaks, do that additional training, and then in a click of a button, reprocess, and it'll reclassify everything appropriately. And so next thing you know, once you have it tuned to your environment, now as new stuff flows in, it's humming and it's just doing it, and you don't have to put a lot of thought into it. So now, that is a good segue to the second part of what we wanted to demonstrate today and gets into some of the newer stuff about how we've been sort of incorporating what is a data flow and what is a pipeline and what is a pipe. This is terminology people are starting to hear now. And what does that mean? Well, it all drives from the class, right? So you need to know what the piece of content is in order to decide what you want to do with it. And different content has, you know, different needs, right? It has different things that you might want to accomplish. Obviously, agency correspondence, I might want to treat that very differently than, say, a core data sheet. So let's say we identify something is a core data sheet. Well, what might I want to do with that? Well, if I have a company core data sheet, most likely I'm going to want to generate a USPI. I'm going to want to generate my SMPCs. I might want to create, you know, all of my various different regulatory agencies, right? I have to submit in their flavor, in their form, this content. And it takes a long time for people to do that, to go through the process of taking that core data sheet, creating those documents, copy, paste, you know, it's very tedious, things get missed. And up to this point, it's always been a human that had to do that because we needed the human mind to do those kinds of actions. It was too hard to code those. But now with with LLMs coming into play and the various different tools that are available with a tool like this, we can begin to automate all of that and take away that mundane human part and let the human be the human in the loop at the end, the true knowledge worker. So
Well,
let's take,
and I
go
think to
ahead.
that point,
Oh,
Brian, I
please.
think one of the things that we see a lot is how do I leverage the really smart people that I already have? And
Right.
as we grow as a company and scale the company, if I can put more of these systems in place that are using the knowledge of the workers we already have, we can minimize the need to add additional resources, but at the same time be able to take on more products and more capabilities within the company. So I think
That's
as a strategy for growth, it's a great way to look at what are those things where we've always had to add extra people to deal with from a manual effort perspective. Let's put technology in place to solve that problem.
yeah, exactly. That's spot on. So let's shift gears over to this interface here. So this interface here as part of the platform is where we configure and set up, you know, data flows, pipelines, and pipes, if you will. Okay, this is where we actually configure and determine what do we want our outcome to be when new content is discovered that exists, and what newly generated content do we want to create. And the beauty behind this is, as I start to go into this and walk through the user interface and show you how easy it is to configure, I want to kind of share a few things up front. One is, this is a configuration screen. The average everyday user isn't going to interface with this. This is going to be thought about usually upfront, once or twice, or depending on new kinds of content types that might come in and so forth. But once configured and once worked out, it's just going to run in the background. And you might make tweaks over the years of use of it, but the idea is that this creates that what we call, precision and control and scalability. It allows us to set up what you might think of in human sense of a workflow. We create data flows. So they're AI-based workflows, if you will. So let's kind of go into one here. And in particular, I'm going to focus in on this Osavego, I can never say it, Ogsiveo, sorry, drug. It's a product, and we chose this one because it's publicly available product that we got information from it from Daily Med. So nothing here that is proprietary, of course, in nature. So what you'll see here is we have this interface where we can set these things up. And it's easy to kind of go in and understand sort of what's going on here. So in this case, in this use case, what they came to us, and this was actually led to a customer and their understanding of it. They wanted to say, look, we've got the USPI. They were a smaller pharma company, and they're like, and we're now going to be starting to go in and submitting SMPCs because we want to start selling into the EU. And so we set this demo up for them initially to kind of walk them through that. So the USPI, there are many ways that we can go about this, but the first thing to focus here is that this is a class-based piece of content. Okay, so what that means is it's going to be discovered. So as we saw in that one diagram in the slides, coming in from a connector, it goes in. As we saw that SMPC in the UI, what it looked like, it's going to be something that came in and was discovered. And when it triggered, in this case, the USPI, it's going to run this data flow. And when this data flow runs, it has a series of steps that it's going to go through and process. So what we'll notice first on the right-hand side is there's this structure. This structure can be done in several different ways. It's easy. You can either manually set up what your structure is. USPIs are somewhat structured already, or it can be based on discovery. So we have a very powerful parser. We'll look at that in a second, of how we can analyze and understand content, and we can sort it out and determine what's what and pre-build this for you. Or it can be done with like highlighting and things like that. So there's a lot of options on how this gets configured and set up, but it all is a precursor to, hey, this piece of content comes in and this is what those sections look like. And so we parse these sections appropriately. Now that's important because the next stage in the process is, what do I generate? So we'll look at the SMPC, for example, as the English version, and we'll also look at the Spanish version for our demo today. So basically what we'll see here is we see a different structure. This is based on the QRD. Okay, so this is a structure that is pre-configured. The EMA has a predefined way that they want this content to be given to them. And so if we were to open this up, we'll see that, deep down inside, we have a mapper that says, okay, from the USPI, we want to map in from section 11 in the USPI to fill out, our qualitative and quantitative composition. We'll see here we have, in this case, an LLM included in this. So we're taking, in the next stage of the process, we're running an internal LLM, which is staying behind the firewall, not going out to ChatGPT. Of course, we do support ChatGPT. It's a configuration. You can choose to use it or not, or you can use other LLMs. We can incorporate that. Our backend, it's easy to configure and add new ones. But we can choose from various roles. In this case, we chose a clinician. Actually, we should probably change that. It should be label author. And then we've got a prompt saying, hey, I want you to read the content that comes from that section. I want you to follow the QRD template, which is this, and I want you to transform and create this new content coming out of that. Okay, so you would set this up one time, and like I said, it's template based. So in the case of SMPC, those template prompts have already been pre-built. So again, part of the life science package, right? If we know about it, we've created it and we've configured it and we've built it into the platform. So you don't start from nothing, you start from, something. But you would do this for the various sections that are in there, and you would set those up. And then when that content comes in, it would pick up and it would just run this on the back end for you. And the same thing's true, and I'll just jump down real quick to the Spanish one because we added an additional component to it where we said, hey, not only do I want you to process this, but we also want you to translate it into Spanish at the same time. So we'll take a look at what do those look like. So let's jump to the viewer side of this just to see what the output would be of this process. And there's a question, so I'll let you take a look at that, Keith, and then if answer it if we or tell me to answer it.
Will do.
So let's go ahead and click view, and let's go into the viewer and let's look at the SMPC English first. So this is a dynamic viewer that we built. You'll see that it very easily follows the structure. It handles tables and images and all those various things. You'll notice in here that there is text that's being mapped. There are many options around whether you want it mapped or not mapped. You'll see the suggested transformation coming from the LLM being embedded in there saying, hey, based on the QRD and based on this content, this is how this should be written. And it's spot on right, okay? You'll notice also we talked about that intelligence and how we parse content. How do we go from unstructured to structured, as Keith talked about earlier? You'll notice this content is all broken down. So if we swoop this over, we'll see every single piece of content that's in the system, they're all structured components. They're broken down now to a level at which we know exactly what that content is, where it came from, all this information. It's part of the intelligence and how we parse content. And we can also transform that into different formats. So what's very important in the case of labeling? Well, it's XML, right? So what does the XML look like? Well, we handle that as well. And we support multiple different templates. For example, the latest templates that have been, all, if you will, the rage is the EUPI, right? And the FIRE format. We already support the EUPI and the FIRE format, and we can transform content into that format in XML so that it can be consumed and used through, for instance, a lens application and things like that. So a lot of power pre-built in already in the platform. But that's sort of what's happening behind the covers. But to the end user, what does this mean? Well, I can just click export to Word, and I can open up the Word document. And I think I already have this one open. If not, let me just double click and open it. What does this look
Hey,
like?
Brian, while you're doing that, let me give you the question that you're going to answer it pretty much real time. After setting up the platform as standard, documents may get modified. How does the system pick this up and modify the document mapping?
After the standard, I'm sorry, I'm reading it now real quick. Standard document may get modified. How does the system? Oh, yeah. So there are different ways that we approach that within our platform. So our platform is about discovery and intelligence and being able to interpret, what's coming through the pipeline. Once we create this document, like I just opened up here, this Word document, you may choose to store that back into Viva. You may choose to use other, other solutions that we do integrate with that can take this structured components and store them into a structured component database, and you can manage those components and they interact back and forth with our platform. We'll probably do a whole session on that, I would imagine, getting into how that works. But the idea is if you put it back into Viva and the fact that we crawl Viva, then, that information flows back in and we understand what we call similarity or, not duplicate, but, content based on those IDs that flow back through. So we can literally know that, hey, this is coming back through. We've already parsed this. We've already processed it. And we can look at what the differences, the deltas, if you will, are there. And there's ways to be able to even view that and see that now.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Sure. So, so as you can see here, as we were going through, we had that viewer, but as I said, we can export that right to Word, and now you're working in Word. And so now your knowledge worker is going from all those steps of cutting and pasting and mapping and transformations and how it should be written and so forth. We've given that information to them, and they can begin to work on it and interact in it in Word. And what I can let you know right now is that our next release, which is coming out soon in about 6 weeks, this is being merged in with track changes, which I think is going to be a very powerful feature, meaning that you will see this in review. You'll see the suggestions, you'll see the insertions, you'll see the content already there. So it will be very easy to just accept, reject, or edit or modify. And so, as opposed to seeing, say, a section and then the suggested, these things will be integrated together. Whoops. So, but that's the power of going from zero to first draft. And once you set this up, it's quite easy. We have a use case right now that we're currently working on, and we're talking about, in this case, language translation. In fact, let me go back and just show that really quick because we talked about that. Let's look at this same view from the Spanish. So there is, as it ran through the transformation, the automatically generated Spanish version of this as well. And so, and we've translated the transformation as well as the text itself that was put through, anything in the tables, all that kind of stuff is put through. So we support, that. And in this particular use case I was just bringing up, they're sending out for translation this content, and it's taking weeks, sometimes up to months, to get these translations back. And what we found was there was still a lot of work that needed to be done on those translations. So they still had to go out to the regional locations. There's 25 different languages that we were dealing with here. And so what we found was that we could do the same thing, the same translation, with not more, if not less, edits that needed to be made, and go directly to the source to review, make those edits, and then push that back so that the system would learn, the language models will learn, and they'll fix themselves as they get better each time as they go through. But we were able to cut down what was taking weeks and months to literally generating all of those in a matter of a few minutes, and distributing them out, meaning that they had approved language translations by the regional locations in less than a week. That's a significant time savings and cost savings, because we were able to do that at a tenth of the cost of what they were currently spending, which was somewhere around $2 million a year. So, I mean, it's real return on investment that exists there as well for the company. It's a way of really saving money. I don't know if you had any questions, Keith.
At this point, no, I think you're doing a great job just talking about the capabilities that are there. I think the language translation capabilities. I think the other issue is when we look at just the new modules coming out and the fact that you talked about FHIR already, when I talk to different regulatory groups and clinical groups, there's so many new standards coming out that the fact that we're able to stay on top of those and be able to use documents that people are using out of the gate helps us to stay in tune with what the industry is doing in general. And I think it's a great way to start new projects with companies, within companies, so that you can actually get things going. A lot of times, many of these companies are starting from scratch. And rather than start from scratch, we can use this as a tool to help generate some of that stuff without having to worry about who's putting all these integrations together and setting up these different reference models.
Right. That's exactly right. And there are a lot of different things, a lot of different pipes, if you will, configurations of things that you can do. We've looked at just transformation and translation and mapping, for example, but we have a lot of things. For example, we had a use case come to us where they said, well, can you take data directly from the database that has a series of calculations and that are going to be injected as a table or injected maybe as a chart, if you will, within, say, a document? Can you create that content using structured sources and ultimately insert it into the document? And so we said, yeah, we could absolutely configure a data flow. So it's not always document driven and document centric. It can be data centric as well. For example, I think we have a demo here of one that, in this case, it's calling on global sales information over the last 3 years, but you can see here that the pipeline is very different, right? So we've got 3 pipelines. We've got to query the database and transform, validate the extract, and then format the output. So, and in this case, our format isn't document anymore. It's actually pivot. So we want to output this to a pivot view. So when we click on this, we'll see, okay, we have a lookup table. That's a lookup pipe that we have that's integrated. It's connecting to a MySQL database in this case, and it's doing a select. This can be as complicated, as need be, right, for a SQL statement, but it's doing a query of structured data and returning that in a CSV format. And then we're putting it through the transformation and using the LLM, the internal one, and we're saying, hey, I want you to read through this data and you to do an average on the data that's in there, and I also want you to sum certain columns, right? And then output that in a new CSV transform format that I want to use for other purposes. And the end result is that data then works its way down out and gets pushed out. And if we go back, let's say, for example, if we go back to, whoops, let me just go over here. There we go. That's where I wanted to go. You'll see in this case, when it ran through the transformation, again, it connected to a database, it pulled structured data out, it analyzed that structured data, it put it into a format that it was expected, and then we have a way of viewing this kind of information. So we can literally open up and see that it's a pivot table. We have a pivot component that's built in, and we can navigate. And this could be exported and then injected directly into another source document. We are working on future release that we could inject it into a document of choice. That's one of the features that we're adding for a customer right now. But yeah, the power of this is immense, in that we can do things that you can't
Well, and
normally.
we spoke with a client that basically wanted to use it for taking data out of multiple different sources and then injecting it. They had somebody who was by hand putting these things into a spreadsheet and actually dealing with it from the spreadsheet. Whereas in this case, we could actually take this data and pull it out of the multiple documents and then put it into the spreadsheet as needed. So
Yes,
instead of trying to have to do integrations between multiple applications, we could actually use this tool to generate the pipes that would actually do it on the fly.
absolutely. Yeah, very configurable and easy to set up. And then once set up, can be run on a one-off, or can be put into what we call, in that scalability. We can move it into a production line and say, okay, we want to do this every time content comes through. We can consistently, in a controlled and a precise way, drive that kind of content through.
One of the other things I want the audience to recognize and see is that many times you're looking at ETL tools, extraction, translation, and load. The reality is this thing can pull data out of lots of different things. They don't have to necessarily extract it, but it can actually transform that data from non-structured data sources and put it in somewhere. So all instead of having to worry about using IT or using somebody that's a data scientist to be able to do some of that work, you can actually identify how to pull it out of your own documents and put that into something and transform that in your own documents. So I think that's an area that we've been working with a number of companies, particularly when they're trying to roll out new systems and they want to be able to pull data out of other systems and put it into the new ones prior to them creating new interfaces and things like that. So I think that's another avenue you can start to think about. How does this help to almost decommission older systems and still have your availability to get to some of that data?
Yeah, that's a good point, right? We had one large customer that archived. They were able to archive 30 systems, Oracle Documentum, and Documentum systems into a single instance of this platform. And they were able to decommission what they were literally spending several $1,000,000 a year just in licensing. That did not even include like the FTE costs for, maintaining those systems on an annual basis. They reduced it down to a footprint that was a fraction of the cost. And now all 30 of those source systems are living in one single instance. I think we're hosting just about 12 billion objects in that one instance. And it's scalable. It's fast as can be.
Well, and I've tried to advise a lot of our clients that sometimes that data, there are lots of companies out there that have multiple products. They've got multiple submissions to the FDA. Not every submission is successful. So a lot of times you have all this data that's captured, or you've bought another company and now you've got data from multiple trials that you don't know really anything about. Well, the reality is you can actually index into that and have that available as potential data for new things that you're working on. And maybe there's some insights that are out there that you don't even know about yet because nobody's really had the time to go through all that. Whereas this one, when you're doing a similarity searching across documents, all of a sudden it's finding something out of a library you hadn't thought about because it's an archived library from a company that you bought a few years ago. All of a sudden, wow, it opens up a number of possibilities and ties back to maybe even some of the research you're doing today. So I think that when you start to look at the power of what this could potentially do for you, all of a sudden it opens up a whole new area of thought process as you move forward.
Right.
We're at the last 10 minutes of the hour, and I just want to make sure we open it up and make sure if there's any other questions or if anybody has anything that they'd like Brian to hone in on or show. We'd love to be able to do that for you. Brian, it's been fantastic so far. And I think you've shown the real power of why it's so important that we integrated this into our RegDoc tool set,
Absolutely.
specifically for our client base. We had one question come in, Brian. A group was asking about how do you keep up with new documents coming into the system? Is it something where you have to recrawl everything all the time, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's two modes to the way crawls work. So we can set up a full crawl, which is always kind of the first crawl, and then you shift into what we call delta. And so when you go into delta crawl, it's just analyzing and looking for what's changed, right? Something deleted, something edited, or something new, has come in. And we have a way of very quickly, determining what that is. So we're only touching stuff that needs to be touched. So it's not, muddying up, if you will, the network, right? There's also archive mode, which you kind of alluded to in your last comment that you had made, but if you can also put it into archive mode, where then you're moving that content and we're getting it, and we keep going back and getting it as often as you want, and it's based on a schedule. So you can run it every 15 minutes, or you can run it once a day, or it's completely configurable.
Hang on a second. What if you want to do searches across different repositories like you showed us earlier? But what if I want to narrow that down to only a certain repository, or maybe just identify repositories that are specific to a product? How does that work?
Yeah, it works. I mean, it's right within the sources. So when you set up connectors and you set up sources, you can map those, and you can do some really cool things with that. So you'll see here as I open this up, you've got Documentum, you've got some structured databases, FAIRs, we've got file shares, and so forth. So you could pick and choose. You could say, hey, I want to look in here and I want to look in here. And then so now when you query, it's going to ignore all the other stuff. You can choose by default is all, right? But another thing to note here is underneath this Documentum, when I choose that Documentum, it actually happens to be 3 different Documentum servers, right? Well, for 3 different regions in this case. And so when I'm querying across all of them from one place. So yeah, it's very easy to just point and click and choose what you want to search for. But by default, it searches everything.
Well, and I think another big use case that we can do, particularly in the life science field, is we were talking with an auditor who was saying, hey, could I potentially use this when I go into my SOPs and I'm looking across the board of my SOPs? A lot of times we're asking for very specific output to be generated on a regular basis. Could I actually search both the SOPs and also maybe our artifact repositories and be able to tie things together?
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on where those live, right? You could filter based on this, but you could also, let's say it's all in one, it's all coming in one, but it's sorted by class, right? So we can go in and we'll do a star search here, just pull back, everything that's in here. And what you'll notice over here on the right-hand side is everything gets aggregated. And these aggregations are automatically created. They're pre-configured, pre-saved and configured, but they're discovered by the system. Humans aren't having to enter these aggregators. But like you said, oh, I want to look across, say, agency correspondence, and I want to look at, cover letters. I'm just making it up here. But you can, apply that. And so now you filter that set that was above 10,000 down to 113. And we're dealing with just agency letters and cover letters. So you can do that kind of filtering very quickly.
Can I do the same thing with countries and languages?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I could go back. Let's see. I'll clear this one. And let's say I want to search across all my Armenia languages. Okay. So it's where, in this case, from a country, it's not looking at the language per se, although you can do that with language. This is looking at an entity type called country. And so if it was mentioned in the document, right, as that country, Armenia, it's been tagged and identified. So now I'm looking at those. Language type, I don't think I have turned on here, but you could turn on language type and say, only show me Japanese documents, right?
Great.
So we could identify those. I don't have that turned on.
And just to give people a sense of different things they could think about, we were actually talking with a legal firm that was talking about doing a FOIA request, so Freedom of Information Act request, and then being able to use this tool to search through that rather quickly, particularly with the auto classification capabilities. So I
Right.
think those are some of the other areas that are big in that area.
Yeah, we had another customer too that came to us and said, "Hey, we want to be able to read content, um, uh, patent-based content, right, coming in from other countries, and we want to be able to very quickly generate the forms in order to submit that patent in the United States." And so, for example, like, in this case, this was just a sample, but this is a document that was a Japanese document, right? So you can see here clearly that was the source content that came in. And of course, we've processed that into English, and then we were able to extract the insight and then rebuild the form using the data flows. So dynamically generating new forms from data that was being pushed in from other languages. And of
That's
course, we
great.
can translate this into any other language on the fly. Like, for instance, let's say I want to see it in German. I can click boom, and now it's translated it into German. So
And I think one other last feature that we should probably talk about before we close this out, Brian, is just the fact that it's not just Word documents or Excel spreadsheets, but you can look at multimedia documents as well, whether it's video or images or things like that too.
yeah, we do the classic baseball player, right? And I like this one because I'm searching for a baseball player, okay? So I'm doing an image search in this case. And so I will do a search and I'll get a bunch of images that come back in the system that have to do with playing baseball. And I can click on one of those and open it up. And so we've done predictive, we've predicted what we think is going on in this image. But you'll see there's text on this particular image. You'll see we've picked up and we've OCR'd that text. So that becomes part of the index as well, which is important. But more importantly, this particular image happens to be inside of a video, right? So it's just a segment within a video. And we can see here as we go down through, we transcribe all of this content at the section level. So if we wanted to jump to a section,
Since a rare but serious genital infection.
so we can basically jump you right to that section. So
That's great. Well, I see that we're just at time, Brian. I want to thank you, and Roy, thank you very much. Did you have anything else to add, Roy?
I think we're good.
All right, everybody, I want to thank you all for attending, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'd love to have talk to you about what we can do.
Thank you.
very
Thank you,
much.
Brian. Thank you, Keith.
Take care.
Take care, everybody.